Hi, my name is Roger Allen. I'm by profession a psychologist and also have spent a lot of years doing organization development, leadership development work. The name of this course is Journey from Fear to Love, Keys to Living from Your Higher Best Self. In the course, I'm going to be talking about 4 different stages. In this particular section, Section 1, I'll be talking about 4 stages of adult development from fear to love. I'll be talking in Section 2 about what desirest thou, living an intentional life. Section 3 is entitled, I'm hurting and I want to stop, taking ownership or accountability for your life. And Section 4 is a new commandment I give unto you, learning to live a more compassionate, a more empathetic life. So I want to begin by sharing with you that life is hard. And of course, it's harder for some than others. Nevertheless, it's hard for all of us. We all have our share of challenges, setbacks, adversity. And how often we wish our adversity would go away. How often we pray to our Father in heaven, asking Him to alter the circumstances of our lives. We long for peace and safety in a world that seems so harsh and unforgiving. And yet I also want to share that life is meant to be hard. If it were easy, there would be no growth. That is why Adam and Eve had to leave their Garden of Eden existence and venture into the lone and dreary world. It's why so many of God's children have wandered in the wilderness on their way to the promised land. And it's why we have to go through our own wilderness experiences on the way to our promised land of eternal life. In fact, life is hard because our Father in heaven wants us to grow. I could say it slightly differently. He even wants us to grow up. He wants us to become emotionally and spiritually resilient and mature sons and daughters. And more than sons and daughters, adults. We frequently sing, I am a child of God, and I love that song and its message. God wants us to know that we are His offspring. We are literally divine as His sons and daughters. This is who we are, our core identity. And yet God doesn't want us to remain children. Perhaps childlike in some ways as we grow and mature. But He wants us to become adults. He wants us to become like Him. And we don't become like Him because life is easy. We become like Him because we face a challenging curriculum which pressures us to grow and learn. You know, I had this realization a number of years ago as we took our youth on a trek to Martin's Cove, and many of you have probably done the same. In preparation, we studied the story of the Willie and Martin handcart companies, and I thought a lot about these pioneers as we ventured over some of the same terrain that they trod, from Six Crossing up over Rocky Ridge and down into Rock Creek Hollow. 200 of those saints died because they left late in the summer, they were ill-prepared, and they encountered early snowstorms. I wondered during our trek why a merciful God would not intervene and alter the conditions that caused the death and suffering of these faithful saints. But as I contemplated this, I realized that without adversity, we would live in a world without faith, grace, courage, agency, integrity, resilience, even compassion. Qualities that are most noble, that enable us to become better people, that help us not only rely upon God, but even become like God, come from adversity. There must needs be opposition in all things. It's the nature of life. It's the pathway of growth. So don't take away my adversity, but soften my heart to reach heavenward. Don't make my life easy, but help me recognize my agency, my ability to choose, my ability to step up to hard things. Enable me to learn wisdom, to act with courage, to help me feel greater compassion towards my fellow man. I think of the Savior in the Garden of Gethsemane. Do you remember the picture of Him kneeling at that gnarled tree? What was His plea? Father, if it be possible, remove this cup from me. What did he mean by that plea? He was saying that the burden that he was bearing was almost too heavy. Have you ever felt that way? And yet, does the Lord remove the cup? Why not? Not because he doesn't love us, but I want to suggest because he does love us and he trusts us. We want God to alter our circumstances, including changing the hearts of other people. But more than circumstances, God cares about who we're becoming, our character, which is forged by living in a difficult, telestial world. Those early saints were traveling to Zion. Perhaps something they learned along the way is that Zion is not a place. Perhaps many of those who died along the way did, in fact, make it to Zion. As Elder Holland has taught us, we no longer think of Zion as where we're going to live. We think of it as how we're going to live. And as Elder Oaks has taught us, who we are becoming is the most important thing about us, more important than what we know, do, or accomplish. So who are we becoming? That's our purpose in this life. And that can only be realized because of, not in spite of, but because of hardship. Well, I want to suggest that we can face this life and our hardships from different frames of reference. As a matter of fact, I can remember a Charlie Brown cartoon that I saw, and this was a number of years ago, and Charlie was standing kind of like this. And Lucy approached him, and he said to her, "Hey, Lucy, there's a certain way you have to stand if you want to feel depressed. It doesn't work to stand erect, to put your shoulders back and hold your head up." Well, you know, that is true of so many psychological states. There's a psychology that accompanies various states. Fear, there's a psychology that accompanies fear or anxiety, or sadness, inadequacy, as well as confidence and happiness and well-being and love. Well, when I say psychology, it's made up, as you can see, it's made up of thoughts and feelings and actions. There's so much that happens to us over which we have little control. Sometimes really harsh realities in our lives. However, we do have responsibility for our thoughts, for our feelings, for our actions. I want to share a story with you. A number of years ago, my wife and I went to a 4th of July celebration, and we decided to invite a friend, a couple from our ward. And this is a couple that were living on the edge. They were struggling. They lived in a crowded apartment, always had a hard time from month to month making their rent. Randy, in fact, had just recently lost his driver's license because of a DUI. They were always on the verge of survival, just barely making it. So we invited them to go with us, and we were sitting on the grass, watching all of the people and listening to a band, an orchestra play in front of us. And I said to Randy, it seems to me like, life has been pretty hard for you. He said, yeah, it has. It has. It's difficult. And I said, it seems to me, if I can suggest this, it seems to me that, you've lived from a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear. And he said, yeah, I have. I said, what is that like? What are the thoughts that you tell yourself when you're in that fear? And he said, oh, this is so hard, and I'm not going to make it, and I don't know that we can survive another month, and I'm just not very good at what I'm doing. I said, what do you feel? He said, I feel a lot of anxiety. I feel a lot of dread as I get up and go to work every morning. And I said, it's not a very pleasant way to live. And I asked him the question, have you ever felt pride? And he said, yeah. I said, tell me about it. When? When in your life? As you look back on your life, when have you felt really proud of Randy? And he said, well, when I was in 8th grade, I was a wrestler, and I was really good. I won most of my tournaments. And I said, wow, that's really cool. Other times when you felt proud? He said, when I was in the Army, I did really well, and I had one of my commanding officers come to me and want me to take a test. So I took a test. He got the results back, came to me and said, "Randy, you have a lot of capability. You might be able to even become an officer one day." And I said, "Wow, how did that feel, Randy?" And he said, "It felt really good for about 30 seconds. And I said, "Why only 30 seconds? And he said, "Because then I just got terrified of the responsibility that would come with being an officer, and I decided that I wasn't ready for that. I was content being a grunt." And I said, "Wow. So you've chosen not to accomplish and do some things that you may have very well been capable of because of this fear." And he said, "Yes." I said, "So I want you to stand up right now, Randy, and I want you to show me what fear looks like." And he said, "With all these people around?" I said, "Nobody's paying attention to you and I." So he stood up, and he showed me, it was kind of like this, and his eyes were darting back and forth, and he was hunched over a little bit and did his best imitation of fear that he could do. And then I said, "Randy, I want you to show me what pride looks like." And he stood up, and he put his shoulders back, and he held his hand up, or his head up, and kind of clenched his fists like this. I said, "How does that feel? Can you feel that pride?" And he said, "Yeah, I can." And I asked him, from which of those places do you want to live? Do you want to live your life from fear, or do you want to live your life from pride? It was time for the fireworks to stop, and so I needed to end my conversation with Randy, and he sat down and, didn't say much, but he said, "Can I have that sheet of paper?" And I tore it off and gave it to him. He put it in his pocket. And then the next Sunday, about a week or so later, he came up to me at church, and he said, "Guess what? I'm going on an extended vacation." And I said, "What? An extended vacation?" He said, "You have been talking to me about alcohol treatment." He said, "I called the VA hospital up in Laramie, Wyoming, and I have an appointment. I'm starting my treatment tomorrow morning." Well, that was exciting to me. I drove him and his wife to the bus station. He got on the bus, went to Laramie. He came back about 7 months later, sober. And he stayed sober, as a matter of fact. He may have had a couple of slip-ups here and there, but to this day, at least as far as I know, it's been a few years since I've been in touch with him, but for a number of years thereafter, he remained sober. He had given up his alcohol because he began to feel some pride in himself instead of continually living from fear. And I'm not suggesting that you can do that from night to day. It's a process in learning to live from pride, but would you prefer to live from pride? And I'm curious, what does fear look like? What does fear look like? What are your thoughts when you're living in fear? What are your feelings? What is your behavior when you're in fear? And then I would invite all of you to think about, what does love look like? What are your thoughts, feelings, and behavior when you're living from love? Well, let me expand this conversation just a little bit by talking about four paradigms from which we can live. And by a paradigm, what I'm talking about, it's a perspective, a qualitatively different way of viewing the world. A paradigm organizes our experience, different aspects of our experience, I should say, meaning the meaning that we give events, our motives, our attitudes, our self-esteem, our beliefs, how we handle our feelings, our relationships with other people. It organizes those aspects of who we are into a coherent framework. And these change as we move from one paradigm to another. We are still who we are, but our experience of life will differ depending on the paradigm from which we're living. So there are really four paradigms that we can talk about. One is a paradigm of survival, and survival is about being reactive and fearful. It looks like this, just barely hanging on. Another paradigm is security, which is coming from duty and conformity. It looks like this. Another paradigm I call success, which is coming from achievement and performance. It looks like this. And serenity is a final paradigm that I want to talk about, which is coming from love and trust and goodwill. It looks like this. So I invite you to think about, how much of your life are you living like this, like this, like this, or like this? The truth is, you will experience circumstances and events in your life differently based upon your paradigm. For example, your calling. Have you ever had a calling? I know I have, that put me in fear or in that survival paradigm. Or paying your tithing. In paying my tithing, I can come from any of those four places. Certainly when the pandemic occurred, pushed most of us back down into survival, and we had to make our way back up into security and success and serenity. But a challenge on the job. Which of the paradigms do you come from? Or a challenge within your family. What is important is not simply the external world, but it's the paradigm that we come from that determines our inner experience. Let me offer a few qualifications about this concept that I'm talking about. I believe that we fluctuate between all of the paradigms in different aspects of life, at different seasons of life, sometimes at different periods of the day. We may move from one paradigm to another. However, we do have a home base. A second qualification, the paradigm that we're in at any point in time doesn't define our worth. Our worth is a given, not something we earn or prove by living from a different state or a different paradigm. Our worth comes from understanding our divine identity as offspring of God. Third, there are valuable lessons in each of the various paradigms. We need to experience all of them in this mortal existence. There's so much to learn from each. In survival, we can learn a lot about agency, but also about the importance of love and receiving support from other people, letting them support us in our journey. In security, we learn the importance of obedience and duty and being part of a larger society. In success, we learn about our power and authority to make things happen. In serenity, we learn about trusting our lives to God, as well as expanding our ability to love all of God's children. As we open ourselves to the lessons of a particular paradigm, we're able to grow into a higher paradigm. We grow in emotional maturity as we move upwards. Survival is a lower state of emotional maturity than security or success or serenity. Ultimately, serenity is most desirable, and not because it's right and the others are wrong or bad. Again, we'll all spend time in all of the paradigms, but because we are becoming more mature and finding greater happiness and meaning as we understand that paradigm. So I want to take a little deeper dive into the meaning of each of these ways of being. Survival. Survival, life not only feels hard, but even overwhelming. It feels bigger than my ability to cope. And worse yet, I feel powerless. I don't have the sense that I have a lot of options to make things better. I feel stress, fear, anxiety, even hostility. It's easy when living in survival simply to be reactive. So much of life seems like a chore. Everything is a have to. I feel burdened. I have to get up in the morning. I have to get the kids to school. I have to do this project at work. Have to, so that life feels like a burden. I feel like I'm just barely getting by. I don't feel good about myself when I'm in survival. I'm not okay. I tend to act out my negative feelings or seek escape from the discomfort of life through mood-altering substances sometimes or experiences. Life is essentially painful. Well, all of us are going to be in survival at times, certainly in times of crisis. But some live here most of the time, and these are often people that didn't grow up feeling safe. They may have been neglected as a child, or been abused physically or emotionally, or lived through some kind of a trauma that resulted in life feeling very unsafe. Such people need a safe place where they can explore and work through their traumas and learn to trust others as well as themselves. But again, most of us will experience that from time to time. When a crisis comes along, we'll find ourselves right back down in survival and need to work our way back to whatever our home base is. So let me talk just briefly about security. Security is the level at which most of us spend a majority of our lives. I want to repeat that. This is where most of us spend a majority of our lives. The major theme is duty and conformity. I'm honorable in my approach to life. I want to be a good person, a parent, worker, or member of the church. My behavior is governed by rules, shoulds, and oughts, as taught by our culture or families of origin. I know what I'm supposed to feel and think and do, although maybe I haven't necessarily looked real deeply to decide for myself. I've learned to go along with social norms because they have value and also because it feels unsafe to risk disapproval or social rejection. What people think about me is important, and I've learned to defer to authority or to please other people. I handle my anxiety and the uncertainties of life when in security by looking to others to guide me and tell me what to do and how to live. My self-esteem and awareness are moderate. I feel about myself as I perceive that important others feel about me. I generally avoid conflict in relationships. I want validation from other people. The message I communicate in my relationships is oftentimes, I won't upset you if you won't hurt or if you won't upset me. Now, I have to say that security is a good way to live. I mean, it's not a bad, we're honorable people. But over time, we may realize that we aren't living fully. We're living to avoid losing rather than winning. We've carved out a comfort zone in which life is safe. Well, of course, we want to teach our children obedience and conformity. This becomes a solid foundation for a good life and a necessary step in their development. But eventually, we want them to grow beyond compliance toward greater trust in their own authority. We don't want our teenagers to wait to be told what to do. We want them to take initiative. We want them to take responsibility. We want them to learn to think for themselves, to solve problems, to make decisions. We want them to set goals and go after them. We haven't rejected the importance of duty and conformity, but we do want them to keep growing into more autonomous people, able to experience their own authority and power to make things happen. In fact, the new youth programs of the church are designed to help our youth develop greater motivation and autonomy if we use them effectively. If we don't have them simply use them in ways that are easy, but if we use them to stretch and grow. So success, and this is what the success paradigm is all about. Success is about changing the locus of control from outside in to inside out. I trust and act from my own authority. I'm internally motivated to set and accomplish goals. I want to make things happen, get things done. This paradigm is characterized by discipline, by hard work, goal-directed activities. I hold myself to a high standard, and I want to be seen as competent and successful. I'm uncomfortable displaying signs of weakness. My self-esteem is conditional. I measure my worth based on performance, or possessions, or power, or popularity. And I can begin to feel over time that whatever I accomplish, it's never enough. I always have this sense that I have to be more, or better, or different, which results in feeling stressed and even self-critical. My personal relationships tend to be emotionally distant, partly because I don't want to make myself too vulnerable. I need to look good in success, and partly because people can feel like my expectations are more important than really knowing them deeply. In sum, life is good when I perform well, although I oftentimes can sense that something is missing. Life has become more about ego feeling good about myself based on all of these external achievements and popularity and possessions, rather than it hasn't been yet an inner journey. Which brings me to serenity. Serenity is about becoming who I am and how I am, more than what I have or what I do. My vision is to become a more mature, even loving Christ-like person. The lessons of security, meaning obedience and duty and conformity, as well as the lessons of success, trusting my own authority, are still inside of me. But my focus shifts from external forms of success to inner success and fulfillment. I still set goals. I climb a mountain. I build a business. I write a book. I give a game my best. But the book, the mountain, the business, the game are not the end. They're a means to a higher end of learning to live as a more conscious, present, and loving person. At the heart of living in serenity is recognizing the importance of agency, the power to act and not be acted upon. Circumstances don't decide how I'll act. Other people don't decide for me. I recognize my incredible power to choose how to think, feel, and act. Jesus taught this when he said, "Resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also." His point wasn't that we should be weak or even ignore or empower evil, but that I am responsible for my response, my actions. I step into serenity whenever I choose to live a higher law, God's law of love, peace, goodwill, gratitude, and abundance, in spite of what might be happening around me. Serenity is about overcoming the world by feeling God's love and tapping into godlike qualities that already exist inside of me due to my divine nature and origin. Well, for this reason, my motivation in serenity is choose to as opposed to want to or ought to or have to. This doesn't mean I like everything that happens. Sometimes I'm choosing between the lesser of evils, but I still choose. And I access my ability to choose because I've cultivated a deep sense of vision, not only related to the tangible outcomes I desire, but my inner life, my being, how I choose to show up in my life. Living in serenity means that I live in the present, in the moment. Jesus said, "Take no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." I get that the only place I can live is here, and the only time I have is now. All life happens in a moment of here and now. And this frees me to let go of the past and not be so anxious about the future. I'm living in reality. I'm willing to see things as they are rather than living from wishes and hopes and fantasies about how they might be or could have been. Well, my attitude about myself is I am okay. It's an inside out, not an outside in. It's a decision to like myself. I trust my identity as an offspring of God. My acceptance of myself is unconditional. It's not based on performance or what other people think. It's an acceptance of myself for who I am, an acceptance of myself as a human being that has strengths and weaknesses. I don't have to prove myself. I'm satisfied with myself, and it's not a complacency when I say satisfied, but it's a willingness to experience satisfaction all through the process of achieving my goals, not just at their completion. Well, this unconditional acceptance of myself, including my flaws, means that I become less preoccupied with ego and appearances. Life isn't about proving myself to others, but it's about expressing my deeper needs and values and aspirations. My behavior in serenity is not governed by my feelings of the moment, which they are in survival, nor by conforming to what other people expect, which is security, nor by doing everything right and well, which is success, but rather a vision of who and how I want to be, living imperfectly from my highest self. I may set and work toward goals, and yet I also ask deeper questions related to my being. Who am I? What is my purpose? How do I want to live? And from the answers to these questions, my life takes on more meaning. I'm less frantic about my goals. I don't demand perfection of myself, but I seek to do as much as possible with the talents that I have been given. I learned that the inner qualities of love, joy, and peace are, in the long run, more enduring than outward success. I know I'm spending a little more time on serenity because I think it's so important. In serenity, I have the same emotions that I've always experienced. I feel anger when in serenity. I feel fear. I feel disappointment, even inadequacy. However, those feelings are closely linked to very specific causes and events. They're not generalized and diffused. I experience anger, let's say, when a trust has been violated, or I experience anxiety when speaking in front of a group. But I don't confuse who I am with my feelings. I recognize that my feelings are fluid and vary from moment to moment. I'm willing to be honest about even my negative feelings. I'm willing to be vulnerable and deal with them as they occur, which allows me to let go of them quickly, and by so doing, create more room for positive feelings. Well, my relationships are based on love and trust and goodwill. I believe that most people are decent human beings doing their best just as I am. I care about the people around me. I want to help them succeed. I show up for them. And I don't just look at them. I look deeply. I see them. I care about what happens to them, and I want to contribute to their growth and well-being. My relationships become a central part of my life and not just an afterthought. I interact with others from a posture of goodwill, trusting that this is what's going to come back to me. At Serenity, I have the capacity for intimacy, and this is because I'm willing to be vulnerable and share myself, be seen by other people. Furthermore, I'm willing to treat the vulnerability of others with respect as well. I don't want to win at others' expense. I know when I enter into some kind of a negotiation that the deeper needs of everybody need to be met. I seek positive results for the good of all. Use of power is participative. Power is used for the common good. It isn't a coercive power. It's not a power simply based on authority. It's a power that's based on caring and valuing other people. Well, brothers and sisters, what I'd like to do is talk about some practices to grow into serenity. What does it mean to live from serenity, to become a more loving person? I want to share, if I could, 3 practices in the remainder of the time that we have today. One of those practices I call be still and know that I am God. You know, I love Psalms 46, verse 10. And in fact, I like to think of it word by word. Be. It's about being. It's not about doing, but it's about being. Be still. You know, to me, that's a very meaningful phrase, be still. It's to quiet myself, to allow myself to feel some silence. Be still and know. In fact, I would say that the way we know is by being still. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I am God. I believe it's through stillness that we feel the Spirit, that we feel God's love, that we feel revelation. I want to share something with you that I've done recently. I brought a little bell with me, just a simple bell. And I've been using it. I use it in my life, but I use it also with my grandkids. In fact, let me just tap it. Well, typically I tap the bell. I'll have the grandkids sit on the floor, and I'll ask them, sit up, and sit up straight and put your heads up, and then I'll play the bell. I'll ring the bell, and then I ask them to listen, and it takes you can hear the bell for about 1 minute, and I'll ask them to raise a hand when they can no longer hear the bell. And I'll go through that a second time. I'll say, how did that feel the first time? And then I'll say, let's try it again. This time I want you to listen to all the noise out here around you. So I'll tap the bell and they'll listen. And then we'll do it a third time often. And I'll ask them to listen inside. What is it like inside if they just listen inside? And what I have found is that my grandkids loved the bell. And as a matter of fact, I've thought at times, oh, they're tired of the bell. We're having our devotional every night, and I've used the bell now 2 or 3 nights, and they're tired of the bell. And so I don't bring it. But they ask me to go get it. Why? They like how they feel when they are still and when they're listening. I consider stillness my home base, just like a child needs a home base. A child will venture out from a parent, and then come back to that home base where he or she feels safe and secure. I need a home base. We need a home base as adults. And I believe we find that home base in stillness. I do a daily devotional, and part of it can include a lot of different pieces, reading the scriptures, prayer, but some of it is simply being still, to feel a connection with God, to feel His love or hear His voice. I also use this time to process any negative events or emotions, which I'll talk about shortly, or to make decisions about how I want to face the day. Or there may be some difficult upcoming event, and I'll think about how I want to handle that event during this moment of devotion, during this stillness. President McKay shared, in our worship there are 2 elements. One is spiritual communion, arising from our own meditation. The other, instruction from others. Of the 2, the more profitable is the meditation. Meditation is one of the most secret, most sacred doors through which we pass into the presence of the Lord. I can tell you that as I take time for stillness, and if you're not accustomed to it, it may be just 5 minutes, that's enough. Or it may be 10 minutes, or those who are really busy, how do I carve out time to do that? It might just be a few minutes during the day. But the physical and the spiritual benefits are many. I believe that is how God speaks to us. That is how we feel His presence. That is how we receive revelation or hear Him. The benefits are many. So stillness is waking up to life. It allows you to calm yourself, to be less reactive. Here are ways to find stillness every day. Take a pause throughout the day, anytime during the day, and check in with yourself. How am I doing? What am I feeling? What's up for me right now? Pay attention to your breathing. Pause before you respond to somebody. Pay attention to something in your physical space. Really look at it, see it, study it, notice it. Be totally present to it. See a person as you're talking to them. Don't just hear them, but really show up for them. See them, look into their eyes, look into their face as they're speaking to you. Offer a prayer of gratitude. Go out and buy a little bell. There are many ways to find stillness every day, not just during a devotional or meditation at the beginning of the day, but even throughout the day. That's something that I encourage in order to grow into our best selves. Remember, that's what this class is all about. It's becoming your best self, and that stillness is one of the ways we become our best selves. So a second practice to grow into love, to grow into serenity, is to face your feelings. A lot of people find stillness difficult because it puts them in touch with their negative feelings. But I want to encourage you to face your feelings. They're God-given. And we learn peace as we learn how to recognize and allow our feelings. It's okay that you're feeling afraid, or that you sometimes feel afraid, or that you feel worried, or that you feel anxious, or that sometimes some hopelessness comes up, or some sadness, or some dread, or some anger. Whatever negative feelings you might be having, those are part of the human experience. And the worst thing that you and I can do is to deny, avoid, or distract ourselves from our feelings. Because when we do so, they don't go away. In fact, they go underground. They go underground and they come out in more harmful ways, such as eating, even though we're really not hungry, scanning your smartphone, mindlessly viewing social media, surfing the internet, turning on the television or the radio, jumping in the car to go shopping or for a drive. Some people consuming alcohol or drugs, viewing pornography, etc. It's better to admit your feeling. This is a way you honor yourself, and it's also how you develop emotional resilience. It's how you learn that you have choices about your feelings that allow you to resolve and manage them. We all face difficult emotions, but we can also learn how to manage these emotions so that we don't have to be afraid of them, so that they don't have to rule our lives. Psychologists have a popular saying, if you can name it, you can tame it. By naming your feelings, you not only understand them better, but you take away their power. There's another saying within psychology, if you can feel it, you can heal it. By allowing and noticing your emotions, they begin to heal. Often this is just a short pause in which you ask yourself what you're feeling at the moment. And then you look inward at the physical sensations and the feelings in your body. The idea is to give your feelings space, not try to get rid of them. Relax into them. Allow them to be. It's okay to feel anxiety or fear or irritation or whatever it might be. And be compassionate about your feelings. It's a way of taking care of yourself when you notice persistent negative emotion. You're taking responsibility for yourself as you learn to pay attention to your negative emotions and give yourself options to soothe and calm yourself. I find that if I just lean into my emotions, just allow them and notice them, generally they start to dissipate. Sometimes if big emotions come up and you need help, then find somebody who can help you, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a friend, or even a professional. So a third practice that I want to talk about to grow into love is to choose empowering thoughts. I want to share with you a story of a 92-year-old man. He was up, shaved, dressed, and well-groomed by 8 o'clock every morning. And today he was moving to a nursing home because his wife of 70 years had recently passed away, and he couldn't fully care for himself. Well, after hours of waiting patiently in the waiting room of the nursing home, he smiled sweetly when he was told that his room was ready. As he maneuvered his walker to the elevator, the nurse gave him a description of a small and simple room, including eyelet sheets hanging in the window. "I love it," stated the elderly man with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old having just been presented a new puppy. "Mr. Jones, you haven't even seen the room yet. Just wait." "That doesn't have anything to do with it," he replied. "Whether I like my room or not does not depend on how the furniture is arranged. It's how I arrange my mind. I already decided to love it. It's a decision I make every morning when I wake up. I can spend the day recounting what I don't like about my life, or I can get out of bed and focus on my blessings and what I do like. At my age, I know that each day is a gift, and as long as my eyes are open, I choose to see the good." Well, each of us, all of us, can live from a place called abundance or a place called scarcity. Living from abundance is seeing the good in life. It's saying yes to life. It's seeing what you love about life. And I don't mean to imply by this a Pollyanna-ish attitude. I've already said hard things happen, and we have to process our emotions related to hard things and learn to make good choices to step up to those hard things. You're not going to like everything about life, but you can also train your brain to come from abundance rather than scarcity, to see what is good, to see what you love. And the more you live from abundance, the happier you'll be. I want to show you another example of what I'm talking about when I say choose empowering thoughts. I call this the empowerment model. And it's probably a model that's kind of popular these days. It may be something that you have seen out there. The idea is it's not what happens to us, but it's our thoughts that determine our experience. You can see an event occurs or there's a circumstance in our lives, and then we have thoughts, and those thoughts drive our feelings drive our behavior, and our behavior produces results. What is most important is not simply the events that occur or the circumstances, but how we choose to think about them, from scarcity or from abundance. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. A few years ago, I traveled to Orlando, Florida, where I was certifying a number of consultants in some of the programs that I've created. And although the trip was really work for me, most of those who came brought a partner or even their families, and they wanted to spend a little bit of time, some of the evenings or the following weekend, playing in Disney World and other theme parks. But what they had not realized is that this was June, a very wet month, the wettest month in Florida, and it rained hard every day. It was interesting to watch how people reacted to the weather. So let's apply it to the model. The circumstance was the weather, and some of the folks that were in my workshop created a whole lot of negative thoughts about the rain. They were telling themselves things like, I can't believe it's raining. I hate this rain. It's ruined our vacation. We can't go out. This shouldn't be happening, and so on. Well, what kind of feelings do you think those thoughts produced? They felt disappointed, angry, bitter, and powerless. And what behavior did those feelings drive? Well, they hung around the hotel, they commiserated with each other, they watched lots of TV, and they made their plans to go home. The result for them was an unhappy vacation. On the other hand, I was really interested in seeing that a few people responded to the rain in a very different way. The thoughts that they told themselves was, well, I didn't plan on rain, but this is Florida after all. What can you expect? There's still a lot we can do around this hotel. My kids love to swim, watch movies, and play games. The rain isn't going to ruin our vacation. We can still have fun. Circumstance was the same, but the way they talked to themselves was very different. These people were not only more positive, but they even saw the rain as an opportunity to spend more intimate time with their partner or with their family members. Some of them went out and bought rain gear and made a big memorable adventure out of taking in the amusement parks in the rain. The rain didn't slow them down a bit. So are you willing to learn to come from abundance and choose positive, empowering thoughts about your life? There are, as I have said, hard things about your life. But are you willing to love many of the realities of your life? Your love is a choice. Can you love your body, your brain, your personality, your house, your job? So many people are in judgment of their body or their brain, their intelligence, or some aspect of their personality, or where they live, or what they do, or, many of these things are just neutral to some people. Maybe some of them even seem negative to you, but you can still make a choice to choose them, to love them, to see the purpose and the good in them. I awoke on a recent morning lying on my side, and I could feel the beat of my heart. And I had a moment of great appreciation for this organ that has served me so well for so many years. My heart beats about 100,000 times a day. Not that I've counted, that's what I've read. Some 3.5 million times every year. Well, I took a few minutes to offer thanks for my heart and for my sight and for my brain. What an incredible instrument, one that I often take for granted. And I knew as I lay there that I would soon go on a run. And it may sound funny, but I had to thank my legs for their faithful service to me, transporting me from here to there, always doing my bidding. Gratitude and love are inextricably linked. Gratitude is, in fact, a form of love, perhaps close to its essence. As you slow down and take time to be grateful, not only for your body, but so much of the goodness and the abundance surrounding your life, you're filling the wellspring of love inside your heart. Well, I want to come back to something I talked about a little bit earlier. Moment by moment, we can change ourselves and put ourselves in a more loving and abundant state by taking responsibility for our thoughts and our feelings and our actions. But I want to conclude today by introducing a model, and this model is going to guide us throughout the rest of this course and the other 3 sections of the course. I love to use the triangle, particularly in the moment when I'm feeling fear. I'll ask myself, what state would I like to feel? What thoughts, let's say confidence, what thoughts will generate confidence? What do I focus on to generate confidence, to generate feelings of confidence? How do I hold my body, and what action can I take to generate confidence? I love the triangle, particularly in the moment, in this moment. But there's another model of growth that I want to introduce you to. And this model is about our longer term growth. I think of this model as 3 principles or laws at the heart of love. Laws that will help us bring our best selves to the events and circumstances of our lives. And brothers and sisters, I have to tell you that, we think of love as a feeling, and love is a feeling. But love is more than a feeling. Love is a way of being. Love is a perspective. It's a way of framing life. And there are many dimensions of it. Christ was compassionate. He lived from kindness and compassion, but he also had a very strong sense of self. You can see in my model that there are 3 parts. One part is integrity. If we're to become more loving people, we have to live from integrity. And I'm defining integrity as living from a strong sense of self. I know who I am. Did Christ not know who he was? Did he not have a strong sense of himself, which allowed him to not become overly concerned about the criticisms that he heard from other people? So integrity is one part of this model. A second part of the model is empathy or compassion, living from kindness and compassion. That's another part of ourselves that we want to develop. And notice that sometimes those 2 are in tension. For example, within an intimate relationship, there may be a tension between being kind and compassionate toward my spouse and yet expressing myself and my needs and my wants and my feelings. And how we resolve that, you see, helps us become more loving people. And it's not about one or the other. It's about learning to do both well. And the third part that you can see, as you can see here, is agency. Agency has to do with my ability to choose, recognizing that I have choices. I can exercise choice. God created me as a free agent who can make choices in my life. So all 3 of those are ways in which long-term we become better. We learn to live from our best selves, bring that best self to the events and circumstances of our lives. And so that's what we want to do, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing throughout the rest of this course. As a matter of fact, Section 2 is about integrity, living from a strong sense of self. Section 3 is about living more from our ability to choose. We're going to take a deeper dive into the meaning of agency. And then finally, Section 4 is about living from kindness and compassion, love, living as the Savior has taught us to love. So it's my hope that this makes sense to you, that you have been able to take something away from what I have talked about today. It's been a delight for me to be able to be here and share these concepts with you. I share these thoughts with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.